Welcome to the Bayside SF Giants talk show. I'm your host, Marc Delucci, joined once again by Kerry Crowley. It's the first time in 3 weeks we're together on the pod. Kerry, it's nice to hear your voice again, talking Giants.
Hey, we're back and couldn't have come at a better time for the Giants as well. I think that
Well, it
we,
could have yesterday, and this is because we're recording on Sunday night. But yes, I agree with you.
yeah, I think, the first month of the season didn't inspire a whole lot of hope in Giants fans. It was in many ways a repeat of last August and September, especially with the way it felt, the vibes around the team, and maybe there were some improvements on the margins. But I think that after this week of baseball, we feel particularly different about this team. And I think, fan energy, fan interest in this team would certainly pick up just because of the nature of the games they play, but also because of the characters who are involved for the San Francisco Giants right now. I think that when you see Luis Matos and Elliot Ramos and Marco Luciano play big roles in games, and in some cases really good roles, in some cases for Luciano there can be ninth inning lapses that make you question things, but these are all things that generate interest in the team and excitement around the team. And I think that when the Giants come home for this 6 game homestand against a really, really difficult Phillies and Yankees teams, there's going to be a lot of people who want to see how they fare. And I don't know that I would have been able to say that at the end of April.
And I always love you pushing that youngsters agenda. I'm all there for it. But also, obviously, the homestand, as you mentioned, with the Phillies and Yankees. And then after that, they go to Arizona for the Diamondbacks. After that, they go to Texas for the Rangers.
Yep.
After that, they go to Houston for the Astros. So talk about like a buckle in. Like this is if you definitely, in terms of, again, we've said many points, right? Like the Giants have had some missed opportunities here, right? Like just in terms of building momentum, right? Whether, something has nothing to do with on-field stuff, right? Just the Rennell like departure, or really severing contracts, firing Rennell. I know she wasn't officially fired, but again, we understand the nature. If they weren't willing to meet her price, we all know what that means.
Mhm.
That sort of quelled the excitement from all the exciting signings they had, right, early in the season. A relatively rough, slow start. Snell getting off to this rocky, kind of start from the get go. I'm hearing some motorcycles around, so my apologies if you're catching that audio in the background. But yeah, like this has been we talked a little before, we were on air, right? That this was probably the most well-rounded week of baseball. I'd imagine win-loss wise, this is probably the best. I mean, this is we're obviously talking the evening after the Giants blew a 3-1 lead, or Tyler Rogers specifically blew a save against the Mets. Obviously, in the bottom of the ninth, they lost 4-3. And so, missing a sweep opportunity, which the Giants have been craving for a while. But they still took 2 out of 3 from the Mets on the road. They took 2 out of 3 from the Pirates on the road. Did they sweep the Rockies? Or yeah, they swept the
They
Rockies
did. They did.
after
Yes.
obviously they dropped the series at home to the Dodgers, but won the last game of it. And so we are at this bookend where we can say they've lost their 8-2 over their last 10, or right in that swing of things, which is obviously a really good place to be. It's a really fun place to be. They're playing good baseball. The lineup is just so much more invigorating. We had Luis Matos. Obviously, when Roger was on the podcast, we got to talk about Luis Matos, MLB Player of the Week. I don't know if Matt Chapman will win NL Player of the Week this week, but he sure might have. He should be in the running for it. And again, just seeing some life from one of the offseason signings that it was. Sorry, my phone here was really concerning, the month he got off to, especially given how the second half of his season in Toronto went last season, just seeing that life in general. I mean, what are, obviously, like you mentioned, it's fun to see Luis Matos, Elliot Ramos, let's say it again, Brett Wisely getting into the
Yeah.
mix this week on the lineup. But you mentioned, obviously it's great for morale and other things, but taking, what are the takeaways from it? What are the things that you're saying, hey, maybe is this a part of this that I can see going further and helping this team win some games and make this a more consistent thing? Like, where are you at with what you've seen from the last week of Giants baseball?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is for the first, I don't know, 40 games of the season, if the Giants fell behind by 2 runs, I don't know that the folks in the dugout believed that they'd come back in that
Yeah.
type of ball game. I really think that the folks, in and around the team really believe that, hey, you'd win a lot of 3-1, 4-2 ball games this year. And that was just the way that this team was built. And it would be timely hits, not necessarily home runs, and you'd need great pitching regardless. And if you didn't get great pitching out of the gate, then you'd be in trouble and maybe you'd lose a game. Maybe that would, hurt the team in the course of the series, and maybe your bullpen depth would be exposed. We saw that happen time and again the first month and a half of the season. This week, I think the Giants learned that they have enough players who can string together quality at bats that they can make life very difficult for a reliever. I mean, the one that stands out to me is Aroldis Chapman couldn't throw a strike in that comeback on Wednesday against the Pittsburgh Pirates, which was really the first big comeback. It was the first big comeback for the Giants of this road trip, of several comebacks. And they just grinded it out. They didn't give in against Chapman. Yeah. And there were opportunities where I think that certain guys who were up at the plate in that inning could have pressed and could have expanded the strike zone and, could have done something detrimental. But when you string together quality at bats like this team did throughout the course of the road trip, I think that feeds into a belief that, hey, maybe there's something here and you can win a game 7-6, or you can win a game 8-4, and you don't have to play by the same blueprint or formula that you played through the first 40 games of the season. So I think that learning to win in a variety of ways is something that every great team is capable of. And I think that, look, the Giants are far from a great team, but to be a good team, to make the postseason in the expanded playoff era, you have to win in more ways than one. And that's what most concerned me about the Giants for the first month and a half of the season. And I think that was erased completely on this road trip, because it wasn't like they did this twice in a span of 10 days or 3 times in a span of 20. They did it, 3, 4, 5 games in a row. And I think that you learn a lot. You learn a lot about specific players. Lamont Wade Jr. is the guy that you want up in every key moment. I think that every Giants fan has known that since the 2021 season, but he showed that throughout this week. And I think that Matt Chapman is another guy who, hey, game on the line, even if the reliever is throwing gas, you want Chapman at the plate because he's going to put together a quality plate appearance, and you certainly want him fielding the ball in those situations because he showed in Pittsburgh with the stop against Joey Bart, obviously the highlight walk-off play against the Mets. He's just someone you want out there in those big moments, and the Giants have more than 1 or 2 of those guys now, and I think that those are my big takeaways from the road trip. It's not, can this team get back to 500, which they did. I think it's, can this team string together good stretches of baseball for multiple weeks at a time? And now I have the belief that it can, whereas May 10th, I did not see that based on what we had seen through the first 40 games or so.
Yeah, Patrick Bailey, another name I throw in that mix.
Perfect.
Again, who's
absolutely
really been locked in really all season when he's been healthy, right? He has you have obviously the time he missed with the concussion, but really all season, both defensively, he's been excellent. We saw really against the Mets how he just shut down the run game. I mean, they continued to try to run on him and continued to fail. But obviously offensively, he has the grand slam among several other really key at bats this week. I think this might have been a conversation we had on KNBR when I feel like you were hosting, when you were asking me, I think you asked me, right, was Chapman or Soler, and like which one, the Giants had higher, or like you have more higher expectations for. And like what I said was like, Soler's been playing better than Chapman. I'm more confident that Soler will return to sort of his career averages than Chapman, simply because he's been playing closer to, again, the thing with Soler, it's not even overall performance. It's been the funkiness of runners in scoring position stuff. And it's just what he does is ultimately something that requires you to lock in for a shorter period of time, like makes, all those things. But what I also said was like, the Giants need it to be Chapman. The Giants need Chapman more, because when you have the lineup like they have, it's just about finding that guy to carry it. Right. Like, and what we've seen the last 2 weeks is that just having that one dude who's locked in. Obviously, you had Matos a week ago. You had Chapman early for the most part this week. Bailey at times, but it's again, it just
wisely at the end.
Wisely at the end. Yeah, there we go. But it just feels like, it is that sigh of relief for everyone else, and you see it, feel like it just builds. And again, this Giants lineup, like, I think this was something that was very true the second half of last season, something that I think we felt for the early part of this season. Like, there's just an anxiety that you just feel in the space. And again, maybe it's fan projection, but it felt like in the locker room, when I was there last season, and you could hear it in comments this season. Look, when things aren't going well and no one has a good answer other than we're just not playing well, like, there's only so many times you can say that before that really starts to nag at the back of your head. And having one player who every time they're coming to the plate, they're doing something incredible. It's like, yeah, that's right. We're pro ball players. You know what I mean? And it makes it just so much easier to relax. Again, that's what makes it so difficult to be that consistent middle of the lineup force, right? Whether we're talking about Buster Posey or Barry Bonds or all Giants legends or legends around baseball, right? Is because that pressure is a lot. And when the entire lineup kind of hinges on you mentally being able to lock in and then being productive. And on the flip side, when you kind of take a dip, that pressure builds on everyone else. We've seen this
Mhm.
past week and a half, what Matt Chapman playing in that 2017, 2018 peak A's Matt Chapman does for this team, right? Like that is the Matt Chapman that was a top 5, top 10 MVP candidate consistently. And the question for the Giants, the rest of the season is how long can he sustain that, right? Like great players as they age, you still see those flashes. You even saw it for moments from Brandon Crawford last year where you saw that great player. The issue is just, look, the game is really hard and, there's injuries that pile up and all these things. It tends to work out that those spurts of greatness, right, get shorter and more spread out and more spread out. Again, aging isn't linear. This isn't a linear process. I'm not saying that's what the case is for Chapman. And that's, I think, the question we saw again, like a first month and a half that he would openly say was really rough, right? That on
Yeah.
both sides of the ball. Again, a few weeks ago, he started to, be much more consistent defensively and the offense has followed suit. And now the question is, can he sustain this? Is this the start of something new that can carry through the first half here? And again, like I mentioned at the top, right? These next 5 series feel huge because as optimistic as we are, the Giants are 27-27 and they have found their way to 500. And we've been talking about a Giants team that's been 500 really for the past 3 seasons, right? And so you have these 5 series, I guess, as I mentioned, the Phillies, the Yankees, the D-backs, the Rangers, the Astros. If you were, it sure feels like there's some pennant, there's some teams that are going to be in the league championship series, right, this season
Mhm.
at minimum. And that's going to be the ringer. Obviously Blake Snell, whether he pitches early next week, we'll see, but ultimately he's back in the mix here. You have Webb, like those 2 guys should be at the top of the rotation. The lineup starting to heat up, starting to find some rhythm. You have young guys who seem to be playing well. And for the first time since that sort of first few weeks of Casey Schmidt and Patrick Bailey last season, we're seeing young players that it looks like, hey, maybe they're going to play their way into some permanent spots and some difficult decisions when a Michael Conforto comes back, when a Nick Ahmed comes back, potentially, again, Brett Wisely or whatever. We'll again, not saying that's going to happen, but just to say, like, you feel optimistic about where this is at. And now you have the test because the Mets and Pirates have good players, right? There's the potential for them to be good teams, but they are not, at least in the moment, they aren't good teams in the standings, and they aren't teams that you look at and you say, oh, yeah, this is the cream of the National League. Like, no, it's not. And that's where you end up with, all right, let's see what you can do against the Phillies. Let's see what you can do against the Yankees, particularly those 2 starting rotations and those bullpens, right? Because if you can get a comeback win against those pens, right? If you can get, 4 runs off some of those starters, that really, I think, is where you turn this from an optimistic week to truly something that's turning around the season and changing the narrative about this Giants team.
Yeah, there's no question this becomes the measuring stick for the Giants. And I actually think you mentioned these 5 series that they play. Of course, leading with the Phillies and the Yankees at home, which is going to be really difficult. But I think that if they can sustain 500, then the schedule
Yeah.
becomes favorable. Then there's opportunities for them to gain some ground ahead of the trade deadline and really build some momentum. And so my whole thing was the month of April could have been a disaster for this team
Mm-hmm.
because they went from having a full squad roster to where no one had been injured, no one was dealing with any nagging
Mm-hmm.
issues to 8 players go down in 8 days. And all of a sudden, you don't even have a pitcher on the 40-man roster
Yeah.
that you can bring up anymore because your depth has been tested to such an extreme that guys in Sacramento are being pulled up from low A San Jose just
Right.
because they're close by to fill those roster spots. I mean, that's how difficult things were for the San Francisco Giants. So you can look at this portion of the schedule and say, well, they beat the Rockies, they beat the Pirates, they beat the Mets this weekend, but they needed to do that to give themselves any hope of surviving this next stretch of the schedule. And so that's why I think what they did over the past, 10, 11 days still deserves credit and still deserves to be praised because this could have fallen a very bad direction for this team, given all the injuries and all the young players who were getting tested at the exact same time. And now I think the Giants are in a position where they're going to look at the puzzle pieces that they have coming back, whether it's a Conforto, whether it's an Ahmed, whether it's a Slater. Blake Snell will be on and off the roster potentially, given his paternity leave situation,
Mm-hmm.
whatever MLB decides to do with that. And I think that you can see how decisions will be a little bit more difficult for Farhan Zaidi and Bob
Yep.
Melvin, whereas a week or two ago, every decision was forced for them and every decision became easy. And so I think you want to be in that position, and the Giants have put themselves there. Now it's like you said, can you turn things around against the Phillies club that, absolutely blasted you in Philadelphia, that you look like you were not in the same league as at Citizens Bank Park? Can you do that against the New York Yankees, who are the class of the American League right now? And even without Garrett Cole, have maybe the best rotation in all of baseball to date. And so I'm really interested to see if they can carry some of this momentum. And you brought up a key point. Can they come back from a late deficit against one of these teams? Because if they can, that's going to do a lot for them, because they'll have done that on the road, and then they'll have done it at home at Oracle Park, where it's, objectively more difficult to hit, where the Giants don't have that same kind of momentum that they built up at PNC Park, which played like Coors Field this week, and Citi Field. So
and
I
you
think
also
that,
the advantage they did capitalize on like back to backs, right? Like Edwin, like like Chapman's loses his command. It was the second day of the back to back that they really got to him. Edwin Diaz, the second day of the back to back, they really got to him. Again, they'd come back against other relievers the day prior, but the big names that you talk about that the Giants got to this week out of those backs of the bullpen, even if this season they haven't necessarily always been up to their named reputations. It's that you got to Chapman, you got to Diaz, two dudes who are have been in that untouchable category, right, for various points throughout their career.
Absolutely. And so this should be fun. And I don't think that I looked at this stretch of the schedule 3 weeks ago and said this should be fun. But when you get to see Elliot Ramos against better pitching, and Marco Luciano, at home, and see if he can find a groove in the field, because he didn't start on Sunday against a left-hander, which kind of tells you how the Giants view his spot on the roster right now, compared to maybe a Brett Wisely and when a Nick Ahmed is coming back. I think that they'll learn a lot about themselves. And then when they do bring these guys back, they'll know that the depth is there in AAA and that they can trust it, because these guys who've come up now have this foundation of success that didn't exist last August and September for some of them.
Yeah, this is a weird spot where it feels like this week is low-key Brett Wisely has a chance to win the job. Like I think
he will too. I do think he will.
Yeah. And we talked about early in the season why I thought Wisely was someone to keep an eye on for making an impact just as a role player, because he hit left-handed and complementary piece, brings some multiple things to the table. But again, Luciano's struggling defensively. It wouldn't shock me if at some point we see the Tyler Fitzgerald for Luciano swap, even if Ahmed doesn't come back, just because, if you're going to have someone sitting on the bench as a role player, you probably rather that be Fitzgerald than Luciano, and give Luciano the everyday reps at Sacramento. But again, it's tough because, again, I'm not going to sit here, and Luciano's defense has obviously been really rough this series. Although, again, I think Tyro's toss on that one is more on him than Luciano.
We both see eye to eye on that.
But you worry about the mental aspect of it, right? Like, again, I think, like, again, Luciano probably, like, there's shortstops who definitely can make that play and do make that play. That said, that was not, like, that is not to me the way in which he was booting ground balls, right? Or he's had some throws that he kind of spiked. The tough part is, like, Luciano's messing up the kind of basic plays, and it puts you in that weird spot, right? Where it's when you start missing the basic ones is where it gets really frustrating and really difficult to trust you in that position. But also, that's not the reason to move someone to a different spot.
Exactly.
If you're missing the routine throw or ground ball at short, you're probably going to do that at third, right? If you're missing the routine fly ball in center field, you're going to miss that in right field or left field too. You know what I mean? Like that. And so it is this weird thing where, and Luciano's been quite productive at the plate. He's been having fairly good at bats, and the bat is the carrying card here. And again, I think, look, they're going to clearly ride out this bit from Wisely. Again, he gets to start against the lefty today. He's having good at bats. He has the lefty homer off Sean Manaea today. So, he has a very clear shot to, like, frankly, the Giants, I think, would be happy, whether it be Wisely, Luciano, or Fitzgerald, for someone to wrestle the job away from Nick Ahmed, right? And let Nick Ahmed be just like a late inning defensive replacement, right? Off the bench, who maybe starts 2 games a week, just because, again, Nick Ahmed's not going to be an impact piece with the bat. So yeah, I would, it's, like, this week, Wisely has kind of a little hinge point here in terms of he could pivot himself into the short-term plans, and then obviously long-term plans eventually too, of where the squad's at.
I actually have a question for you on Luciano that I'd like to ask, because I look, I'm not in love with the defense at shortstop right now, but there's not exactly another position that you move him to a top of mind and say, oh, yes, Marco Luciano should be a right fielder.
This has
No
kind of
chance.
always
Like,
been the problem. It's people have talked about right field for a long time. It was always third base is the easy one, or
yeah,
like the
but they
standard
won't do that
one.
right now.
You wouldn't do it
Not in
right now.
2024.
I mean, and it's not even Chapman. You got Casey Schmidt behind it, where it wouldn't make sense to throw him in front of. So yeah, I've always understood why the Giants have been so what some scouts have kind of called stubborn with Luciano, right? Because he doesn't have. It's not like, I mean, maybe second base.
I think first base.
Yeah,
And and
but
that's not ideal. You don't want a right-handed first baseman.
and talk about the
Uh,
pressure, and again, the pressure you're putting on the bat, and again, the thing with Luciano is the consistency of the basic plays, which first base, talk about a position where that's, and again, you look at the current Giants roster, it's like, well, you got Lamont and Wilmer, so even that's not really pushing like the current situation. I mean, again, like the outfield is the one just because it makes it more flexible, but is he hitting enough to justify that? And that's a big adjustment for a guy who's never taken fly balls in the outfield at this point. Like, that's ultimately the consequence of the Giants sort of taking the kind of brute force. We're giving him shortstop. And to be fair, Luciano's also had a lot of injuries, right, that have given him hiccups. Luciano has always been a really streaky player. And
mhm.
again, I think part of that is his relative youth. Part of that, and on top of that, again, a guy who has struggled to stay on the field. He hasn't played 120 games, or he might not even played 100 games in a season more than once, maybe twice. So,
Mhm.
and you have obviously the pandemic here in the mix as well. So, because I'll say this, right? When the Giants called up Luciano last year, I got to see him in person at Oracle Park. And obviously, I watched him quite a bit at AAA because I was more closely tracking the team. He impressed me defensively last year at short.
Yeah.
And I remember, shout out to Krogpod, right? Like Roger said the same thing at AA when Luciano started the year, because he was we were both kind of, we'll see how short. And then after the first month in Richmond, Roger was like, no, what I'm seeing from Luciano here is a viable shortstop. Like, yeah, he's not going to be a Gold Glove winner, but he's good enough. And what I saw at Oracle Park last year was that way too. This has just been kind of, sometimes you get errors and clumps, right? Things get mental. And again, the fact that they're the basic plays, I think, says to me he's pressing. I do wonder if coming out of the 2022 season, that, I think, it wouldn't shock me if Luciano's offseason work was really defensive centric. Like, the team was really kind of focused in that place because, again, it was kind of coming on to that shift point as he was moving to the upper minors. And, the year prior, he'd done quite well at, high A. He'd been one of the better hitters. He dealt with injuries. He hadn't played that much. Um, I do wonder if maybe this offseason and really spring training, like they focused more on the bat because he hadn't crushed the upper minors in the way you a guy with his track record of hope. Like, it's just time sometimes too, right? Especially for someone, again, who's younger, who is ultimately still very raw as a prospect, despite how long we've been talking about Luciano. Luciano, I remember when Luciano and Canario were both teenagers very early in the Giants system, and they were the two dudes who were like the 70, 80 grade, like raw power, like bat speed type of dudes, where it's like you see serious power. And ironically, at the time, and again, this was a fair analysis, and I was among them. The thing about it was Luciano was just such a more fluid athlete. It played more. Where Canario, it really only showed up occasionally and was inconsistent. It looked really rigid. And Luciano, I think there's always been a fluidity with himself. He's kind of a lanky physique. Like, it can
Mhm.
get, I think, clunky and long at times. He's always looked really fluid offensively, even in the swing. Even though, again, it is a longer swing, you do see a hitch every once in a while that seems to kind of lock up a bit. Like, there's the fluidity, and at times you see it in the field, but it feels like he looks a little more uncomfortable more often. Again, we'll see how it progresses. But yeah, I just don't see the other position for him. I mean, this is the thing when people were saying the Giants need to get, Luciano, we need to see a shortstop. Kerry, how many shortstops, how many healthy shortstops do you believe are in the Giants organization right now? Minor leagues, major leagues.
Guys who could play shortstop
Guys who
at the major
you
league
think are
level one day.
a league average, no, right now are currently a league average defensive shortstop.
Can I say 0?
Yeah, that's the correct answer. It's like Artiaga would be the one, but he's out right now with Tommy John surgery. And, Nick Ahmed's obviously on the IL right now. Brett Wisely, before yesterday, had played 32 career games at shortstop between the minors and major leagues. And, he's a good athlete. I've always, he was in Tampa, so he really got blocked from a lot of positions. Like, I actually think Wisely's more viable at short than his experience suggests, but that's still a big ask. We're still asking a dude who's been developed as primarily a second baseman in the majors, and now we're like, all right, give shortstop a try. There's a reason there's not many second basemen who make that move. So, I think the Giants should be patient with Luciano. Again, I Wisely has earned a longer look here at short, so I have no problem with that here. But I would be really hesitant from a fan perspective. I think it's very easy to overreact to this week in a way. And again, Giants have also been spoiled with shortstop defense for so long with Brandon Crawford, right? This is kind of like the post Buster Posey years when it comes to catcher, right? Like,
Yep.
you're going to stumble through it. And you're seeing, again, like early in an opening day, right? They chose defense with Nick Ahmed, and, he's not going to bring a lot offensively, like that's kind of the trade-off at the moment for them. So give the young guys a shot, let Luciano go through the growing pains with it. But no doubt, I mean, he obviously needs to find some stability, because again, you just worry is like he's currently kind of playing himself into kind of 40s across the board, which kind of makes him just a DH only. And again, the bat obviously would have to come a long way. Again, Marco Luciano is still is 22 years old, right? He turns 23 in September, so I'm not worried.
I am going to change my answer though. There is one league average shortstop, and it's Matt Chapman.
No, this is the Casey Schmidt thing all over again. I mean, maybe, who knows? Maybe he could be. I don't know.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, honestly, you're not wrong though, right? If we're like grading this out, he probably is the closest, right?
Yeah. He's my one guy who I think could do it.
Well, again, Mauricio Dubon would have been their everyday shortstop last season.
Moving
Just
on.
saying. Yeah, speaking of, I think, things that have frustrated fans this week, the two losses were late inning leads, ninth inning leads. There's an easy way to spin, so the Giants are on a 10-game winning streak. Obviously, Giants fans will take this week, and one win here might lead to a loss elsewhere or whatever. But Bob Melvin's getting criticized because when a bullpen blows a game, people are going to complain about the manager moves. I'm curious if you have any thoughts. I think the particular one, at least for me, I know I tweeted about it, was yesterday, using Camilo Doval in the, I want to say, bottom of the 10th, right after the Giants, Yastrzemski kind of clears the bases, gets the Giants a 5-run lead. Doval had been warming up because it was a 2-run lead. No complaints about why he was warming up. But then to me, once you get the 5-run lead, they had a lefty leading off. Like, you just got Drew Pomeranz from the Dodgers. Like, that seemed like a potential opportunity to sit Doval down. And then obviously today he was unavailable because of that, or I should say because he, pitched so much this past week. But I'm curious if there's anything that kind of sticks out to you that you'd like to see maybe going a little differently as we move forward.
The number one thing is actually from Tuesday's game. I wouldn't have brought Luke Jackson in that situation. And I don't think that, look, I really like his story. I think that you can use him as a sixth inning guy. You can use him when you're down a run, maybe in a tie game if you're in the fifth, or even the sixth inning if you're short a guy in the bullpen. But Luke Jackson did not earn his way into that situation. I think that I would have brought Camilo in right then and there, because you have an opportunity to keep the win streak going at that point. And it's a 4-run game, but it's the 10th inning. And so there's a runner on, or it's the 9th inning, whatever. I still just go with Camilo or someone else in that situation as opposed to Luke Jackson. And I think that, look, I'm of the belief that, you bring in Pomeranz yesterday, you bring in someone else in that situation because it was a 5-run game. But I do understand that if Camilo's already throwing in the bullpen, there are a lot of people who would say, then you got to bring him in. He's already, been taxed for the day. And at that point, you might as well just use him. And so I actually take less issue with what happened Saturday and Sunday than I do with Tuesday to kick off that road trip for the Giants. And I have enjoyed Luke Jackson's Giants tenure from a storyline perspective. I always think it's cool when guys come back from Tommy John surgery. I thought the gamble the Giants took on him when they signed him to this multi-year deal was an interesting one to analyze, but I don't think that he's someone that you trust in that situation.
Yeah, and it takes time, right? Like, John Brebbia, his ERA was effective for, or but Brebbia took a while, right, to become
Yeah.
like, by
That's
the
why I'm not sold on Robbie Ray.
yeah, yeah, and so that's the other thing with Jackson too. Maybe by the second half of next year they get what they were hoping to get. Right, he sort of gets back to that pitcher he was in Atlanta, but he's not there right now. Yeah, I think the thing about yesterday's game, what will be Saturday's game when this comes out on Monday, is so much does come down to like what those internal methods of tracking pitch counts and pitch reliever usage is for the Giants, which I'm not sure if I haven't seen any quotes from Melvin on if this was the case or not, because again, they're tracking every pitch a guy makes, right, in the bullpen. And so that's, not just their pitches in games, not just their appearances, but also, if they're warming up, if you warm them up twice in a game or whatever, they're tracking that. And because the Giants had this streak of, the one problem with the comeback wins, you take the wins when you can get them, right? But what it means is they were having to come back because their starters were getting tagged for runs early. So you have to chew up the length of your pen. And then you still have to use all your high leverage guys because you're coming back and it's a tight game, right? So, and right now the Giants have three high leverage guys that you really trust in Ryan Walker, Tyler Rogers, and Camilo Doval. I might add Randy Rodriguez to the mix, but either way, it's really 3.5, right? At least for me. And so you have three guys that you're trying to make it through the 7th, 8th, 9th of 1-2 run games here for about a week's long stretch. So again, everyone was stretched thin. Tyler Rogers was worked 3 days in a row this week. I think Doval was 3 and 5 days or what it was with yesterday. And so if because of how Doval had already been used in the week, once he started warming up in the top of the 10th inning yesterday, that meant he wasn't going to be available on Sunday no matter what. Then I have no problem with using him because he's already unavailable today. However, if it was a case of he still would have been available today if he felt well in the morning or whatever, I would have wanted him sat down, give Pomerantz that shot. Obviously, sure, maybe Pomerantz blows the lead, but I think odds are I think Pomerantz gets through that. And again, maybe you have Doval available today to potentially close out another win. But yeah, it does become on the rest stuff. Yeah, Luke Jackson, it's tough because I think Melvin wants to give the veterans a shot, right? And he's giving guys a chance to maintain role. I mean, again, it took him longer than I would have for Ryan Walker to jump Jackson into being the first 7th inning guy, right? And Walker obviously has made that jump because he's been so good over this first month and a half, and Jackson has struggled. But yeah, I do agree with you there. I whether it's Doval in the 9th inning or honestly just a reliever other than Jackson in that spot, just because I think Jackson and frankly Taylor Rogers is kind of in a similar spot for me where I think they just haven't done well in the high leverage spots for the Giants over this past season plus. Like it seems like pressure does get to them, and so looking for softer landing spots, whether it's middle innings or just like platoon opportunities, that I think I'd be more inclined to let them ride.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I think, fortunately, we've had a ton to talk about, and I hope that that's the case next time because it'll be the Phillies, it'll be the Yankees, and if we don't, that probably won't bode well for where the Giants stand after maybe their most important week of the season, or not necessarily their most important week, but their biggest tests of the
It's a
season back to
turning
back.
point potential, right? Like this
Yeah.
is the thing. Look, the fact is the Giants season up to this point has been disappointing, and it's borne out in the record. It's borne out in the stats. It's borne out by all the things. It's what they expected the season to be. They have not met up to this point. If you come out of this week, 3 games against the Phillies, 3 games against the Yankees, and you are 4-2 in that stretch, again, not saying that's my expectation, that is a very big deal, for this team in terms of proving that, no, we can stay with the big teams. We can, punch above what it looks like our weight has been. The Giants, as of today, are officially a third of the way through the regular season. They're 27-27. They have not made the playoffs after being at 500 or below at the 1/3 mark, dating back through the World Series runs. You got to go back for the last time they were 27-27 at this point, 2004. They finished season 91-71, but Steve Finley knocked them out of a tiebreak with the Astros on the last day with a grand slam. But with the expanded playoffs, they would have made it. So take that for what it is. That's the fact I'll leave you with today. That's Kerry Crowley. I'm Marc Delucchi. Thank you for joining us on the Bayside SF Giants podcast. We'll be back next week again on the other end of the Phillies and Yankees series to see how the Giants shake out in this pretty pivotal early season homestand. See y'all. Thanks for listening.